Welcome back to the Six Steel City Rings podcast, episode 10. My name is Ray Whiting, and with me I have Ms. Leanne Lohman and Mr. Bob Quinn. Both are senior staff writers for Steeler Nation. Guys, how you all doing today?
Great.
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Taking it one day at a time. Guys, I know things are kind of slow right now, leading up to the draft. We have, today's the 10th, so we're looking at roughly 2 weeks, maybe 3
Yep.
weeks. So, of course, things are kind of quiet right now, but we still have some stuff to talk about. So there is still some meat on the bone. Guys, let's get to work. For starters, some of the Steelers leading with Russell Wilson, they were in San Diego with some of the receivers, doing a little catch drills and everything, trying to get used to one another, trying to gel. And Pat Freiermuth was there, along with a few other receivers, Steelers receivers. One in particular who didn't show up was George Pickens. I know some have made it, I saw some of the comments on social media, some have made it out to be a big deal. Some have even said that Plaxico Burress 2.0.
Oh my goodness.
And so it's kind of somewhat interesting. But share your thoughts on it, please.
I think people want to talk about stuff and are making it a big deal when it's not.
Yeah, I don't think it's Plaxico necessarily 2.0. I mean, Hines was the leader of the wide receiver group. Pickens is now the leader of the wide receiver group, for better or for worse. There's not going at this point. There's not going to be a veteran presence who comes in unless it's via trade. A guy like Van Jefferson, who has never really achieved anything in the NFL. I mean, he had a little brief fantasy football spurt with the Rams a couple of years ago. Calvin Austin came in the same draft class as Pickens. I just don't read too much into it. I don't think he's, he has some blind loyalty to Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph. We know there seemed to be a feud brewing with him and Kenny. I just don't. I think he's looking at it as I better get my rest in now, because depending on who we bring in via the draft, he's looking at double, triple coverage.
But the reality is we have no idea why he wasn't there. I mean, for all we know, he could have had a family trip already planned or some other thing going on. Do you know what I mean? That made it difficult for him to go, because it was all the way out in California where Wilson lives with Sierra. So it was, it's a big ask. It's not like you're doing it right in Pittsburgh. So you're expecting everybody to come out here and work out. And so, I think it's unfair to classify it as him not being a good team player like some people are, when we don't even know why he didn't go. For all we know, maybe the timing just didn't work out for him. And so, I don't know, but I don't like always, I don't like the narrative that that he's always going to be this like problem child. My hope, because like you said, we don't have that veteran presence in the wide receiver room, is that, Van Jefferson can be that type of guy. I mean, he is a veteran wide receiver. He doesn't have to be the best wide receiver on the team or even the number two, but hopefully that he provides that kind of like grown up, calming presence in the wide receiver room that helps mentor Pickens. He's got the pedigree. Do you know what I mean? He's been to a Super Bowl. He's got some stuff going for him. So I'm hoping he can be that guy and help these younger guys. I think of it sort of like Patrick Peterson did for Joey Porter Jr. last year. He was never going to be like necessarily the top guy. We knew that he was getting older, but he was that kind of adult presence in the room.
I think it's hard for a guy to when he's basically a third, really fourth wide receiver, to come in and be asked to take leadership over a room where Pickens is just so much more talented than he is. So the question becomes, and it's not even a level of maturity. I mean, if it's a workplace and you're the top performer and you bring in some guy off the street who just can't do the job, or cannot do the job anywhere near as good as you can. I think in all professions, how much are you really listening to someone who comes in and gets in your ear, and you look at them and say, but you can't do the job, so why am I going to listen to you? I mean, it's not like you're a coach, you're my
Right.
teammate. If he was defying coaches, that'd be a little bit different, but we haven't heard anything like that, at least not yet, knock
But
on wood.
frankly, Pickens hasn't really achieved that like fantastic level of success. Do you know what I mean? At this point, whether that's him or the result of who his quarterback is or the crummy offense they were in. Do you know what I mean? He hasn't even had the chance to show. We know he's talented. We've seen the catches he can make. Do you know what I mean? But he hasn't had the opportunity to put up big numbers.
Yeah, I think that 1,000 yards he put up is
Yeah, it was good.
yeah, that last season opened a lot of eyes. I mean, everybody sees the highlight catches. Everybody knows
Yeah.
what he can do on a combat catch perspective. But I mean, he's going to get a chance now to be a true number one.
Right.
Bar,
But you
barring a
get the
Brandon Ayuk trade.
Yeah, you get the people though that say that, like you look at like Justin Fields and they say he's such a bad quarterback, but he has those moments where he puts up these huge flashy displays, this amazing run or this amazing, throw that he makes and has these moments of brilliance, and you look at the highlights and you don't look at all the in-betweens. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's people that feel like Pickens is like that. Do you know what I mean? Like the in-between stuff isn't necessarily good, whether it's that he's not a team player or that he's not out there blocking or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? And they don't look at that stuff. And I don't know that that's fair. I just think he hasn't been in a stable enough offense to be able to fully judge him. And what we have seen from him has been positive.
Yeah. So, I mean, my take on this situation here is Russell Wilson, is taking the lead on this, hey, example of leadership. And I asked myself this question, here's something I'm going to pose to you also. Where's the leadership on offense? Has the offensive leadership been lacking in the past few years in the Steelers organization? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, since Ben, yes. Wilson is a veteran quarterback. We'll see. I mean, it's a good first step that he's throwing with receivers, but frankly, almost all NFL quarterbacks do that. So we'll have to see what kind of relationship he develops. I think it's interesting that Pat Freiermuth made the trip. He's eligible for a new contract. If the Steelers don't get something done before training camp, their policy is generally they don't negotiate during the season.
Right.
So I don't see Freiermuth holding in, but he doesn't have a contract beyond this year. So developing a bond with Russell Wilson could be his best route to getting paid. Now, that being said, I think if Justin Fields holds a workout where he's throwing, and if I'm going to start getting excited and sold on either one of them being the quarterback of the future, then I'd like to see them throwing together with the receivers. That would, set the tone that Wilson is very serious about mentoring Fields, and it could be the ideal situation where the Steelers keep both of them beyond this season. I don't know how realistic that is, but at the same time, I mean, that I think would be a big sign. I think the interesting thing will be what do they do with Pat? And we're going to get into some draft talk here in a little while, but with the rumors that Brock Bowers, who was all during the season was a consensus top 5 pick, is now being talked about sliding as low as 2025. Steelers don't necessarily need a tight end, but Bowers is a generational tight end. So the question becomes, what do they do there? As far as leadership goes on the offense, it's an extremely young offense. If Wilson leads like he led in Denver and by some reports in Seattle, it could be another floundering mess like it's been since Ben retired. And I don't know how much control Ben had over the young offense other than the fact that he's going to the Hall of Fame. Don't mouth off to him.
I think they did what he said. I think we talked about this one other time that it's one of the things that's been a challenge for the offense that, you talk about that Steelers way and that being passed down to these younger guys. And we talked about this on the defense, how that happened, from Joey Porter and James Harrison and Troy down to Cam and TJ and now Joey Porter Jr. And, they keep moving it down through the generations. But to me, defense runs differently than offense. Do you know what I mean? You have the offensive pyramid is very much a triangle with that quarterback at the top. And I don't think Ben was somebody who was building all of those relationships with everybody on the offense. I mean, it was pretty well known that he could be a little standoffish, do you know what I mean? And had his favorites and kind of let the rest of them just do their thing. But you've heard guys that play for the Steelers say that, when he asked them to do something, when he told them what they were doing or something like that, they would listen. But on the offense, I think that the Steelers' way on the offense is one that was passed down through the offensive line. And we lost the last of those guys, the Ramon Foster, Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro group. And when we lost those guys, all at the same time almost, I think it left this like sucking void on the offense where we didn't have people that were kind of that same group that would take to task with people like they used to do. They would be quick to point out flaws to keep each other in line. And I think, that was missing. So if one of these guys can, whether it's Fields or Wilson or somebody else can provide that kind of leadership to kind of get that group back together, it would be really nice to see, because we don't see the camaraderie in the offense that we do in the defense over the past couple of years.
Yeah, and Arthur Smith is he may be the guy who has to provide. The offensive coordinator should be, at least leading the offense, but
Yes.
ideally you want to see someone on the field. But Smith is so respected around the NFL. I think a lot of the younger players need to understand and embrace the fact that, there's no question about Smith as a coordinator. There was questions from a head coaching standpoint,
Right.
but Marcus Mariota, he had a decent year with Matt Ryan, Desmond Ridder, didn't have great quarterback play. So if Arthur Smith comes in and all of a sudden Russell Wilson, who has had success in the NFL, has another year like he had in Denver, and Justin Fields doesn't improve turnover-wise, they're not necessarily going to blame Arthur Smith for that. They're going to blame that, okay, these are in fact effective players. We were hoping
Right.
would revert back to some form. I saw an interesting thing on Justin Fields today. They were talking about Caleb Williams. Ross Tucker, actually on the Rich Eisen show yesterday, was talking about Caleb Williams and the mistake that he thought the Bears were making. Caleb Williams was smaller than Justin Fields. He's slower than Justin Fields. He doesn't have the arm strength of Justin Fields, but they think intangibles, he's going to, because he looks like Patrick Mahomes, is going to be better than Justin Fields. What makes me feel great about Justin Fields is that the Chicago Bears, who cannot evaluate quarterback talent to save their lives,
Right.
gave up on Fields and traded him for basically nothing. I mean, even if it's the 4th round pick, if something happens to Wilson and he plays 60% of the snaps, that's a very low price for a starting caliber.
Next to nothing. Next to nothing. Ryan Clark said something today. He was on All Things Covered this morning with Brian McFadden and Patrick Peterson, and he is like solidly in the Justin Fields camp. He believes that Fields needs to be and should be the long-term solution for the Steelers. He said his biggest concern is that Russell Wilson will perform at such a level that he stays in the starting role while not doing enough to win playoff games, like doing enough to stay, but not, you know what I mean? So you can't bench him, but not doing enough to win playoff games. And he said, because when Mike Tomlin says Russell Wilson is going to, get the pole position or whatever, he said, if somebody is named as the quote starter for OTAs and training camp, he said, it is very hard for the person underneath of them to take that spot. He said, it didn't used to be that way. You used to be able to beat somebody in camp and take their spot. And he said, but the way camp is structured now and the lack of kind of competition that goes on, he said that's going to be really hard for Justin Fields to do. He said, so he's going to have to do it. It's going to have to be during the season. And Wilson's going to have to fail, and he's concerned that won't happen.
I think, and I think the preseason will play a big part in it too. I think Wilson will get the number one reps, but if
Yeah.
and Fields is going to look great in preseason. Let's make no mistake about it. He
Yeah.
was a starting quarterback in the NFL, and he's going to be taking reps against the 2s and the 3s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if he's going to look good. So if Wilson struggles at all, it could put some even though it may be a little bit unfair because Wilson's competing against the 1s, and then kind of like Kenny did with Mitch. Kenny comes in and looks great in the 2s and 3s. He
Yeah.
has this miraculous comeback, and all of a sudden the clock starts ticking on Mitch. Russell Wilson isn't Mitch, but
No.
there could be some groundswell for this Fields thing. And, ultimately, I think the best possible case scenario, since we're in this now, is Fields or Wilson plays good enough to earn another year with the Steelers, and they'll pay him more
Right.
towards what a top of the line quarterback will get, and maybe have Fields before May 2nd. If Fields will agree before May 2nd to a 2 or 3 year contract in Pittsburgh, then it's simple. You have this
Yeah.
year with Wilson, you sit behind him. You either pass him or he did so good, we're going to keep him for one more year, and now we've got you for a year and a half, 2 years, on basically a proven
Yeah.
deal before we have to pay you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Guys, as mentioned, the draft is coming up here shortly. And I say this time of year is kind of like Christmas season. You know how when you was a little kid, you get the sales ads and you look at the toys and see what you want. And you just, you say, I want this, I want this, I want that, So, and again, it's kind of quiet, but we still have to talk about this, I believe. Who are the top targets for Pittsburgh, and how do you think they will fare out, or how important they will be to the team? So there's a list of targets, top target draft picks. Amarius Mims, Alabama. Jackson Powers Johnson,
Georgia.
I'm sorry, Georgia. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Georgia, yeah.
I'm so stuck on Alabama right now. I'm sorry.
You and me both.
There's plenty of
Thank you,
Alabama
yes.
players
All
on
the
this
time.
list, trust me.
Yes,
Right.
Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon, who was slated to be the top pick, Steelers' top pick. So, Adonai Mitchell, Nate Wiggins, J.C. Latham, Graham Barton, Talise Fuaga, Brian Thomas, and Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. Finally.
Yep.
Guys, there are a lot to look at. Again, we got the 20th pick right now in the 2024 draft. Guys, share your thoughts, and who do you think they should draft first, and why? Leanne?
Who do I think they should draft,
Right.
or who do I think they will draft? They should draft.
Yeah.
They should draft Amarius Mims. They need
Yeah.
the tackle. It is, that's the preeminent offensive line position. It's not necessarily, Pittsburgh, the history of center is been important. Jackson Powers Johnson is so weird. He went from, okay, he's probably the best center in the draft, has a Senior Bowl. Everybody's, putting him up in the teens as far as the draft goes, which is insanely high for a center. Nobody since Pouncey has gone that high. And now he's kind of sliding back down. Do I think he's a really good center? Yeah, I do. I mean, but there's talk now that Pittsburgh might even be able to get him in the second round, not at 51. They'd have to trade up to get him.
Right.
But there's a talk about him sliding all the way out. Although there was talk today, I think it was Mel Kiper who came out and said he won't get past Seattle at number 16. So it depends who you believe. Mims. All right, so you got Thomas with the Giants from Georgia, who is an all-pro caliber tackle. Roderick Jones was, according to Brian Baldinger and many draft sources, was better than Andrew Thomas in college. So why the Steelers played him out of position last year, I don't know, but they did. Bottom line is he needs to go back to left tackle.
Because we're busy like with Dan Moore. Like, love you,
Yeah,
Dan Moore.
exactly.
Don't want to upset you. I don't understand it.
So, Roderick goes back to left tackle. Well, Amarius Mims is supposed to be better than both of them. and
Yes.
he's a natural right tackle. He only played about a half a season between 2023 and 2022. He was opposite Broderick on the 2022 national championship team. He was producing at an insanely high level before he got hurt this year. Upside, I mean, Mims has phenomenal upside. Joe Alt is your slam dunk, but there's no way he's going to be there when the Steelers pick. Oh, Atanyu from Penn State, I don't think will be there, but it's possible. And that would become a very interesting decision because he's a polished guy, but he's more of a left than a right. I mean, if you're drafting on potential in the first round, trying to hit a home run, I think you would overpay for Powers Johnson. I think you would underpay for Mims at 20. So Mims would be the guy I pick.
I'm with you. I mean, 100% on Mims. I've been doing a lot of writing on the centers stuff. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at this and like reading, people who are experts on offensive lines and centers, opinions about this, like way more stuff than I ever thought I would read about centers. And if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I was pretty sold on Jackson Powers Johnson. You know what I mean? Even if it was a little bit of a reach to take him at 20. Do you know what I mean? I felt like it was so critical that we have this good center that it really made sense. And then today, the statistician guy from FDP or whatever that is was on the North Shore Drive podcast. And he's the third person I've heard say in the past week that the difference between production and centers in the first round and second and third round is negligible. Like if you put them all together at the end of it, with the exception of very few, like Marquise Pouncey types, and Powers Johnson is not Marquise Pouncey. Like, don't, you know what I mean? Don't mistake it. He's good, but he's not that good. So he said, really it's negligible. He said, so what is more critical for the Steelers is to look at that offensive line position and draft somebody like Amarius Mims, or he said even like a cornerback, and save that center pick for your second round pick and then wide receiver for your third round pick. And I think that makes a lot of sense. What concerns me is whatever this is with Dan Moore, that we seem to feel like he is good enough, and why that's okay. And we're going to allow him to, I mean, I hear so many people, so many of the Steelers reporters say it, that they like him, they're happy with him. Do you know what I mean? That he's a good, reasonable option to keep for one more year. And I have a hard time understanding, if you have Amarius Mims sitting there at 20, how you don't take him and kick Dan Moore to the curb.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is if you're going to skip out on tackle on the first round, and cornerback, let's face it, is a real need, and a guy like Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, who I love. I've loved him in the draft process all along. And if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would say Nate Wiggins over Mims. But some guys I really, the more I hear about Mims and I mean, I'm in Florida. We see Jacksonville is North Georgia.
Right.
We see a lot of Bulldogs games. He looks the part. I mean, he's always looked the part.
Oh,
I mean, that the bookend tackles with him and Jones in the national championship year. I mean, it was amazing. But
and he's played with Washington and George Pickens. Do you know what I mean? They were all teammates, so he has other connections on the team, which I think is huge.
The other name, although I'm starting to see him climb, is J.C. Latham from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
He's bigger than Mims. He's slower than Mims, and I think that's why so many draft experts like him, because Mims is about 20 pounds lighter and is phenomenal. And let's face it, right tackle is blocking the left edge, and the left edge is usually the dominant edge on most teams. So, having a guy who can get out and beat, the edge rushers to the spot is an appealing thing. Latham is just so big and strong. It's like, okay, you can beat me to the spot, but all I got to do is get my hands on you, and you ain't going anywhere.
I like Latham a lot.
Yeah, they kind of trending towards that here in recent drafts.
And he's also a natural right. He's also a natural right. Like, we wouldn't be playing him out of position.
Here's a question for you. Here's a question. So we need a cornerback. we need an offensive lineman, we need a center, two linemen. Those are the needs, and a linebacker.
Well, I
Would
think
you
you're pushing
consider-
linebacker probably to day 3.
Yeah.
Would you consider trading away draft picks to move up to get these players? Because I believe you get 4 good solid picks. Say Mims. Hey Mims. Just wishful thinking here.
Yeah.
Kool-Aid. Either Jackson Powers Johnson or Zach Frazier.
I don't think you would get Kool-Aid in the second. I mean, it's
No, but what I'm saying is, if we can get 4 solid picks,
Mhm.
would you trade some of like the late round picks to move up?
Well, you'd have to have a team agree, and
True, yeah.
the scenario has been floated that you could package maybe the 2/3 to move up in the second. So let's say I heard this scenario today on the Pony Show. So, or the PM team with Pony and Mueller, give Chris Mueller credit too, that they pick Amarius Mims in the first round. And all of a sudden, day 1 ends, and Jackson Powers Johnson is still on the board. So then you package maybe the 51st and one of the thirds to move up to the top of the second, or high enough in the second where you're ahead of center needy teams, and you get Mims and JPJ. I don't know how realistic that is, but if JPJ did slide to the to the Joey Porter slot from last year, where he could be the first guy off the board in the second round, and they can find somebody willing to trade with him. I cannot.
It's so
fathom-
situational. It's so
Yeah,
hard.
I cannot fathom though more of a home run scenario for the Steelers, because then you have solved the offensive line. Even if
for a long time.
Let's say Mims takes half a season to develop, just because I saw this. I'm forgetting his name, but there was an offensive line expert who was on, and he was talking about how upset he was with the Steelers for playing Kendrick Green out of position. He should have been a left guard, never been a center.
Yeah.
Kevin Dotson out of position, should have been never should have been played out of position, and said it was BS that the Steelers even tried to do it.
Yeah.
So there is some concern if you take a guy like Mims, who's all upside, that the current offensive line coach in Pittsburgh, Pat Meyer, doesn't understand. Well, I've got a first-round draft pick at left tackle. I'll play him at right. I've got a guy who's a really good left guard, but I'm going to play him at center. I got a guy who's a really good right guard, but I'm going to play him at left guard. There is some concern and some whispers. It's one of the reasons why initially when they hired Arthur Smith, I was down on the hire, because they brought Pat Meyer back when Mike Munchak is closely associated with Arthur Smith, and they are big fans of each other. Why you wouldn't move heaven and earth to bring Munchak back to Pittsburgh, I still don't understand. But if they get those top 2 guys, if they were to somehow pull off Omar Khan, and yes, we need a wide receiver and a corner, but those are deep positions in this draft. Geez, I can't imagine a better scenario for the Steelers than to get both of those guys.
I agree. I think if you could do it with something like you suggested that's within reason, then it makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I am never a fan of like selling the farm to move way up in the draft and you lose all these other picks of things when you have so many needs. We aren't a team that's like 1 or 2 players away from a Super Bowl. We have some significant needs, and I don't think we can dismiss those. And I think in a draft where it's so deep on offensive line players, do you know what I mean? And offensive players in general, it's hard for me to justify, they're talking about there being 6 centers in the draft this year that would be able to start as rookies, do you know what I mean, with some support. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of centers. So I think, for me, it's hard to imagine giving away too much when you have so many options available to you. But, there are some players, and like the one the the draft you suggested that makes a lot of sense for a little something extra. So I think, if it worked out like that, then I think everybody would be okay with it.
Yeah, because
Absolutely. Go
I
ahead, Rick.
remember, I remember when Ricky Williams came out, University of Texas. Mike Ditka, I think he was he was a
I
GM
had
for a
just
team.
taken over the Saints. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and he did some wild trade. Not
Mhm.
not as crazy as the trade where the Herschel Walker for X number of draft picks,
Yeah.
the Minnesota Dallas trade.
It
But
was pretty close.
yeah,
It
Was pretty
was.
close. He
yeah.
traded his entire draft.
Um, but like I said, I mean, the panic button, we shouldn't have to hit it right now. Not yet. Pending on the quarterback play, if Russell Wilson and Justin Fields stink up the joint, then yes, it's time to push the panic button.
There's a lot of pressure to get starters in this draft. You need a starting center. You need a starting corner, at least in the nickel. You need a starting wide receiver to be your number two, because I cannot stress enough, none of the guys on the roster are number
are
two.
not it.
There's no guys in free agency who are number two. So, Adonai Mitchell is an interesting prospect, AD Mitchell, depending on, how you know him. He's not the speed demon that his teammate is, Xavier Worthy, but
Right.
he's also the better receiver. I mean, Worthy just ran by everybody and scored touchdowns. Mitchell actually ran the routes. He caught more passes. Steelers have had him in for a visit. Very similar to George Pickens in build. No way he lasts to the second round, I don't think, at this point. But if he somehow did, he would be another guy who would be an intriguing, hey, let's move up to get him. Depending on the guy, and I've kind of said this guy's name before. He's not a first round prospect. He's not a second round prospect, but the Cedric Van Pran reminds me so much of Marquise Pouncey and Dermontti Dawson.
Yeah.
He's fast. He moves. He's a pulling center. He's the only guy in this draft who I feel could be a Steelers type center. Now, that being said, Broderick Jones and Amarius Mims are so athletic, they could be pulling tackles. So
Right.
you don't necessarily need a pulling center if you go with Horace Johnson or the guy who's the flavor of the week right now, Zach Frazier, who has a lot of positives to his game. Everybody is now projecting him to the Steelers. I think you got to really move up in the second round to get him too. If he
agree.
fell at 51, that would be another really good combination. But if you could get a guy like Mims in the first, and then you move up a little bit in the second, and you get maybe Mitchell slides, maybe Brian Thomas slides from LSU. You get one of those big, really impact wide receivers. There's good guys to be had down in the third round if you just stay put. Malachi Corley is a really good prospect. Xavier Leggett is a guy that they've brought in. There's some interesting things to be had, but another thing is kind of a dark horse. Defensive line. Byron Murphy is kind of become the consensus number one defensive lineman.
Yeah.
But I really like Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. He has been mocked in the first round basically since the season ended. He slid a little bit, but he's a guy, not that we've had, Kendrick Green nightmares from Illinois, but he's a guy who could be a sneaky, hey, all the tackles went off the board. We're not picking a center at 20. He's a guy who could maybe slide in there and just say, okay, defensive line is a real sneaky need for the Steelers.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I see him as somebody that, makes a lot of sense for the first round, but I do think he's talented. I think it's hard. This is a hard defense for that. There just isn't a lot of quality defensive linemen, and makes you worry that it's like one of those years where there aren't good quarterbacks, like the year we drafted Pickett. And so your value exceeds your actual value. Your draft value exceeds your real market value, like where Pickett was really probably a reach in any other draft. I mean, he would have been in the third round of this draft or something. So, I worry that when you have so few players like that it does really inflate their value in a draft.
Yeah, they were kind of 1 and 1A, and now it's clear number one Murphy and clear number two
Yes.
Newton. I mean, I watched a lot of tape on Newton. I really like the way he plays. I think he's a perfect
He's
fit
really
for the
good.
Steelers.
Yeah.
But I mean, not over. The draft would really have to blow up. There'd have to be a huge run on tackles. There'd have to be the
Right.
wide receivers and corner. Would have to. I mean, just with how it's supposed to fall with quarterbacks, I'll give Ray credit. Ray was on the J.J. McCarthy train before the rest of the NFL was.
Yeah.
I've seen him go as high as 4 now.
It's crazy.
There you go. Guys, as Steelers fans, we always talk about the glory days, the years, how we reminisce on remember that game, remember Super Bowl 43, the catch with Santonio Holmes. James Harrison, that 100-yard interception return for a touchdown. We think about, we talk about players, and since we're on the subject of draft picks, the question is who, and there's a number to go around. I mean, there's so many to go around. We look at the best first-round draft picks in Steelers history. The best.
Okay, who's picking first?
Huh?
Not me.
Who's picking first?
I'm not.
Me.
No.
I'll go
Big
first.
Bob pick. You go first, Bob.
Okay, that's number one draft pick, and we're qualifying this. So in case any of you older fans come out with some of the guys pre Chuck Noll, then sorry, we're not counting those guys.
Right.
No, all due respect to them, but
Yeah.
I mean we got to have a limit here. Joe Green for me is the guy who the first Chuck Noll draft pick, heart of the Steelers, one of the only 3 Steelers to have his number retired. Really the heart and soul of the Steel Curtain defense. Lambert and Blunt and all those guys were Hall of Famers, but when they sat in a meeting room and talked, Joe Green was the leader of that group. Lambert on the field was ridiculous, but he wasn't a first round pick. I have to go with Joe Green, just what he meant to the franchise. It took 3 or 4 years for it to turn around, but it's
I definitely think
hard
very young fans don't know. I mean, they hear the name, they know he was great, but I don't think that they realize how his fingers were like in everything. Do you know what I mean? How much he meant to the players, do you know what I mean? Working with keeping everybody getting along, and you know what I mean, kind of mediating as well as on the field stuff and with fans. I just think that it's really valid. His reach was far beyond just what he did on the field.
A lot of people don't know he was really close with the chief, Art Rooney Sr.
Yes.
And they had a standing appointment where they would meet and
smoke
talk,
a cigar and
smoke a cigar on a weekly basis. And
Yep.
I think that really did a lot, and it was a big signal to the NFL because let's face it, part of the Steelers dynasty in the 70s was they maximized HBCU and
Yes.
HBCU talent. And if you look at Joe Green, technically not an HBCU guy, but I mean he might as well have been with North Texas.
Might as well. Yeah.
Mel Blount, Elsie Greenwood, some of the really great Steelers players of the 70s.
Oh yeah.
Were small college guys that the rest of the NFL ignored. And
Yeah.
And I think it really influenced Dan Rooney as well. And it's one of the main, to me, just looking from the outside, is one of the main reasons that he pushed so hard for the Rooney Rule, because he saw these guys of great integrity.
Yeah.
Joe Green's a smart guy. Mel Blount's a smart guy, and he pushed for, hey, these guys are good people. Don't tell me these aren't the people you can associate with, because these are great men who have demonstrated in a locker room as players that they're great leaders of men.
Right. And we'll pretend like we are at some equal point today in society. But definitely back in the 70s, there was still a lot of snubbing that went on of Black athletes, depending especially on what part of the country you were in. And I think a lot of the younger fans don't know that the Chief used to have these guys over to his house for dinner as his friends, as his coworkers. Do you know what I mean? Invite them and their wives to come over and have dinner with him and his wife. And it was just a different relationship with the Steelers players than you see today, for sure, but that you saw even then on most of the teams. Do you know what I mean? He really took a very personal interest, in the players, would send them postcards and write them letters, and yeah, just different.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, who's going second?
Go ahead, Ray. I'll clean up.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna say my second, I would have to say, because again, Bob, you mentioned Joe Green. I mean, that whole era back then, I mean, it's just like, just take your pick. I'm gonna go against the grain. I'm gonna say Al Faneca.
Interesting.
I say Al Faneca. And the reason why is because Al Faneca, he was one of those unsung heroes. And I'm kind of like a 2-for-1 here. David DeCastro, to me, was kind of like the heir apparent to Al Faneca. I was watching this one clip on ESPN, and Ray Lewis gave Al Faneca high praise. And he said, if you don't get to him first, if he gets a good run to start, he's going to run over you. And Al Faneca, to me, Al Faneca was, I mean, he was just a good role player. I mean, good teammate. Again, when it came time for the guards to pull, when he was pulling, you better believe he has a good run to start. He's going to run somebody over. And Al Faneca, to me, like I said, it was just, that's what made the Steelers offense so good, the guards.
Yeah.
A good pulling guard that has that speed, that has that agility to move side to side. And then once they get their body shifted, they're off and running, making that lead block for the running back. So, like I said, Al Faneca, to me, by far, that's my number one pick.
Yeah. So here's my dilemma, is that I do feel like there's a part of me that says that, like, to be this top pick, I feel like Joe Green is kind of slotted in there and I can't move him. So, like, next to beside him, who else could you say? And I want to say that this person needs to have a championship. Like, how do you validate what you've done in the NFL if you've never won a Super Bowl? You know what I mean? But then I also tell myself that we're talking about impact here with players, and a Super Bowl is a team effort. And so if the rest of your team isn't up to snuff, that can't be blamed on the player. So I'm going to say TJ Watt, because even though he doesn't have the Super Bowl to back it up, I think he's revolutionized defense and what's happening with defense today. I think because of what he does, I think it's also changing the way offenses work. You know what I mean? I think he's somebody that's very hard to plan for. It was clear when he was injured with that pec injury, despite the fact that I think Alex Highsmith did a good job filling in for him, having him off the field is a massive blow. We can't afford to not have him. And so I feel like he's just somebody who's really gained the respect of the whole NFL. Do you know what I mean? And so much so that they're needing to snub him because we're talking about him too often. And so I just think it's hard to deny the impact that he's having. He's just a tremendous player. Honorable mention goes to Ben Roethlisberger, because I think Ben was the modern face of the NFL.
You get another pick.
Oh, well, we're doing more than
picks
one
in a row.
So
is my next pick? Oh, my next pick is Ben Roethlisberger. Yeah. But, I mean, definitely, I think Ben was for people who were alive in the 70s and got to see those teams play. Do you know what I mean? If you weren't there, then the only thing you really know is Ben Roethlisberger's era. And I think it was tremendous. I think he was consistent. I think he was durable. I think he had some bumps in the road early, but unlike other people, he matured, he recovered from them, he cleaned his act up, whatever you want to call it. And he didn't backslide. He moved forward. And I thought he was really, made it so that we could focus on other things. He wasn't a selfish player. He took team friendly contracts at times. He did what he could do to be able to put together these Super Bowl teams and stayed cool under pressure. And I thought he was tremendous.
Yeah. And one thing, going back to your TJ pick, I don't think you can undersell the fact that, TJ was basically the end of the first round. And
Yeah.
I think what he's 25, 30 picks behind Myles Garrett, who he's definitely better than.
100% better
Football
than.
Focus, if you're listening.
Well, then don't you remember I did something the other day about TJ and JJ and had to revisit how all the comments from when he was being drafted, where it's like, well, he's no JJ. Well, he's no JJ. Do you know what I mean? Don't expect him to be JJ Watt, and he's not, right. He's better. He's better.
Exactly.
So it's my pick now. Okay. I'm going to say my pick. Gosh. From the University of Southern California, Troy Polamalu. Do 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 do. Baloo baloo. Do 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 do. Baloo baloo. So I gotta go with Troy because Troy has given this generation, and Leanne, you mentioned earlier about different generations. Troy has given this generation something that they have never seen before.
Yeah.
Troy, to me, he is all over the field. And, again, think about this. When the year they drafted him, Bill Cowher was looking at drafting Ed Reed. Did you know that?
I've heard that before.
So, but like I said, we kind of lucked up, and well, not say lucked up, but we got Troy Polamalu.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. I mean, the guy is he just flies all over the field. His tenacity, especially plays where he just jumps over the line of scrimmage. The one where, again, I still talk about this to this day. The one where Tennessee was down on the 1 yard line and Troy timed it just right. He jumped over the line and sacked Kerry Collins. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, Troy was like a Swiss Army knife to me. He was just whatever he wanted to do. I mean, he did it at his own free will. And again, he just knew how to play that position. I mean, again, that's my pick right there for my second first round draft pick Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Interesting you should mention Ed Reed because Ryan Clark got asked today who his top 5 safeties in the NFL were, and he would only name people he'd physically laid eyes on. He's like, I'm not going back to the beginning of time. And yeah, Troy was heading his list along with Ed Reed was on there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, you guys left me arguably the guys who should have been second and third.
Yeah, there's some good ones.
All right, before I talk about my second pick, let's give honorable mention here to Terry Bradshaw. And which means you can probably guess who the other one is. Yes. Terry Bradshaw, first overall pick in 1970. The Steelers have not had a top 8 pick since. They have only had 7 losing seasons since they drafted Terry Bradshaw. Bradshaw's career got off to a very rough start. Everybody knows the deal with him. He spent, basically 5 years, and, many fans in Steeler Nation are still thinking that any quarterback who comes in, well, Bradshaw took 5 years to develop. We got to give whoever that kind of chance too. It's just, Ben took exactly a half of a game to develop. Right. So, you got to look at the difference between the two. I mean, the only Steelers MVP is Bradshaw. But I can't take away that first 5 years where he struggled so badly. The guy who is definitely my second pick, and if Joe Green was the beating heart of the Steelers since the dynasty, Franco Harris is the soul. I mean, the Steelers had never scored a postseason touchdown until the Immaculate Reception. They Franco was the difference. When Franco came in 72, they started winning playoff games.
Yep.
He was the number 2 all-time rusher when he went to retire. Peyton passed him. He never got past Jim Brown. I think it's absolutely unforgivable what the NFL allowed to go on. It's one of the reasons I hate the Cleveland Browns. I don't have a lot of respect for Jim Brown for what the antics he pulled when Franco was nearing beating his record,
Yeah.
calling him, soft, running out of bounds. He doesn't deserve my record. Franco, if he doesn't get injured, starts his career with 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons.
Yeah.
He's just, I mean, not to mention the fact, if there has ever been a better ambassador for the city of Pittsburgh, then please, maybe Roberto Clemente. Franco was so well respected in the city, did so much. I know he had some, foibles here and there with the gambling, things where not that he was accused of gambling, just his association with, the casino and all that good stuff. He passed away before. It's just an epic tragedy that he passed away before his number was retired. I've never heard anybody say a bad word about Franco Harris besides Jim Brown. And frankly, Jim Brown should have been ashamed of himself for what he did.
Yeah. Jim Brown has no right to say anything about anybody. The man was like a serial abuser. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know how you're going to talk about anybody. I think he needed to just take his seat and keep his mouth shut. Or we can all talk about what Jim Brown was doing.
And think about this, guys. 3 big running backs back then in the same division. Franco, Jim Brown, Earl Campbell. Okay.
Yep.
Now,
well, Jim Brown retired in 65, so
he was gone.
But what I'm saying is, what I'm saying, Bob, is 3 big power running backs. Okay. Now, we recall how Earl Campbell ran the football. We recall how Jim Brown ran the football. I mean, just straight power, try to run people over, things like that. If now Franco Harris, yes, he run out of bounds, to save the wear and tear from his body. Franco, before the Lord called him home, Franco was walking just fine. Earl Campbell now, because of the many hits and everything he took, is in a wheelchair. Things like that. So
it has been for a long time.
Huh?
And he has been for a long time.
Right. Right, exactly. And like I said, Jim Brown, back in his days in the 60s, Jim Brown, I mean, he was bigger than a lot of opposing linemen on these teams. So it was one of those, smash mouth football.
Yeah, I mean, I don't appreciate how Jim Brown treated Franco, but I don't think we should undersell his talent as a running
incredibly
back.
talented.
Yeah, I mean, I think his point was 12-game seasons, 14-game, 16-game seasons. He ran over people. Franco ran out of bounds. But I will tell you this: I cannot think of, and I watched a lot of Steelers games in the 70s. I cannot think of a time where Franco stepped out of bounds when he had a 15-yard gain, and he probably could have fought for a 16.5-yard gain. He already had the first down. He didn't step out of bounds short of the first down marker. Okay.
Right.
When he was running the ball, he would turn it up and punch it in. I love Franco I love Jerome Bettis, but Earl Campbell's the best running back I ever saw. I mean,
100%. He's another one who changed the game. Like, he changed the way football was played. You know what I mean? He was the first running back to do the kinds of things that he was doing on a consistent basis. And yeah, I think he really changed the face of the game. He paved the way for guys like Franco. But records are made to be broken, and so you can't be bitter. You gotta be glad that you had the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim Brown was. Earl Campbell, I've never seen the bus was close. I've never seen anybody run the ball like Earl Campbell. I mean, you could not tackle that guy. His thighs were,
big.
I mean, as You can't even say he was a big around as a player. I mean, his thighs were probably twice the size of most of the guys tackling him.
Yeah.
And he was fast. You know, unlike Bus, who, I mean, God love him. I mean, but let's face it, he's 300-pound running back, and in his youth, he could break away, you know, occasionally. Campbell could break away at any time. The only thing even close to it I've seen is really Bo Jackson.
Oh,
And
yeah, yes,
they,
yes.
and even that isn't a perfect combination or comparison because Campbell was so much bigger than Bo, and Bo was so much faster than Earl. But
Yeah.
that same kind of power speed combination, it's so rare. And younger fans who, you know, who didn't see him, you know, he single-handedly the Monday night, the Steelers crushed him in the AFC Championship game. But the Monday night game, about a month before they played in the AFC Championship game, Earl Campbell put on a display like you would not believe. And as a Steelers fan, you were pulling your hair out. How can this guy be running through us? He's running over Lambert. He's running over Joe Green. He's running, you know, Donnie Shell gave him his comeuppance the next year. But, you know, that first year when they lost 34-5, the Houston did to the Steelers in Pittsburgh, that right before that, Campbell put on a show. And if you've never seen the highlight, I think he was playing the Los Angeles Rams. I think 11 guys hit him on
Yeah.
a 70-yard run, and he completes the run. His jersey's all torn and everything else. You could not bring the guy down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, guys, good talk once again. Great talk once again.
Always.
Again, I'm itching for the draft, and again, we're going so much more to talk about.
Mock draft next week.
Mock draft.
Yeah,
next
mock
week.
draft
Here
next
first.
week.
Okay. Guys, before we go, Bob, what should you do?
Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.
All right.
Yes.
Leanne?
Like, share, and subscribe. Send us your mock draft. Send us your thoughts via email. We want to hear from you.
All right. And our email address is 6steelcityrings@yahoo.com. That's SIXSTEELRINGS@yahoo.com. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see the email address. Guys, episode in the books. Thank you very much. Guys, great talk. I will see you all next week on the 6 Steel City Rings podcast. Take care and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.